It's not enough that the Russian pipelines were sabotaged. Apparently that was the Russians, okay. The Crimea bridge blown up with a truck bomb, killing 3 civilians, like basically an ISIS, Al-Qaeda attack. Apparently that was also the Russians. And it's not enough to do that. They are not done poking the bear. Here's Zelensky saying that the West should preemptively launch a nuclear strike on Russia. Yeah.
Що повинно робити НАТО? Унеможливлювати застосування Росією ядерної зброї. Але, що важливо, я ще раз звертаюсь до міжнародної спільноти. Як це було до 24-го? Превентивні удари, щоб вони знали, що з ними буде, якщо вони застосують. А не навпаки, чекати ядерних ударів Росію, щоб потім сказати, ах ти так, ну ось тримай від нас. Переглянути застосування свого тиску. Ось я вважаю, що повинна робити НАТО. Переглянути порядок застосування.
That sounds like a genius plan. I agree with Zelensky. They should consider the way they apply pressure on Russia. Have you considered tickling them, maybe, instead of a nuke? Maybe you could avert World War III. I'm just saying, That is his brilliant plan. He wants a preemptive strike on Russia. I genuinely question his well-being right now, because the first thing you learn about the Cold War is that you had mutually assured destruction, right? MAD. So if someone launches a nuclear weapon, let's say from the Americans launch a nuke at the Russians, then the Russians can also send a volley of nukes at the Americans. And they don't need to do it from Russia, right? You have nuclear submarines, not just nuclear powered, but actually nuclear armed submarines. The locations of these submarines are secret. And that means even if the Kremlin, for example, is nuked and there's no president, there's no government, those submarines, who could be in any ocean, any sea, anywhere on the planet, they carry nukes and they have the authorization to launch nuclear weapons in response. So again, there's a wide array of means that the Americans, the British, the French, that everybody can basically destroy the planet. And that's what would happen. That there is no question. The Russians are very clear about this, that, they have certain conditions. And I think these conditions are largely the same for most countries, that, if the government is under threat, or the existence of the country itself is under threat, that would justify them launching a nuclear weapon. I can't imagine NATO striking Russia with a nuke and then Russia not responding. Why do I have to explain this? This is insane. I should not have to say this crap. This is common sense. Why do I have to explain this? Now the best thing is that Zelensky is walking back what he said. Look, this is from Politico. The headline reads, Ukraine says Zelensky's preventative strike misinterpreted as Moscow fumes. I'm pretty sure anyone would fume when you say you want to nuke them, but okay. Ukraine went into damage control mode after remarks by President Zelensky were interpreted as him calling for the West to take preventative strikes against Russia, prompting a fierce response from Moscow. Zelensky spoke Thursday via video link, so that's the video I just played to you, right? Look at this, though. They're saying that the interpreter messed up his words. Okay, that's the excuse. So he said that they should deter Russia's use of nuclear weapons, and NATO and the international community must take preventative strikes. Before the interpreter corrected themselves to say preventative action. I mean, what does that mean? Does the word really matter here? It's very obvious what you're referring to. He's saying you should nuke them. Help me understand this, Zelensky. What other strike were you talking about? You're going to throw shoes at them? What are you going to strike them with? A SAM? What is going on? He was talking about nuclear strikes that I don't understand. Look at this, man. Even if the Americans or NATO or whoever would target the installations themselves with conventional weapons, the Russians would use the nukes. You cannot go after someone's nuclear arsenal. Number one, you don't even know where they are, because they're, as I said, they could be on a submarine, they could be scattered across Russia, they might even have some in space, who the hell knows. I wouldn't be surprised. So number one, you don't know where they are, all of them. You don't know where the launch sites are. And number two, even if you took out Putin himself, you would be nuked. So this guy's basically saying, let's go for World War III. That's what he's saying. Here's Biden. So Biden was saying that the risk of a nuclear Armageddon is highest in 60 years. For once, I agree with him. For once, I agree with Biden. That's correct. There are not many minutes to midnight left. Okay, let's put it that way. Speaking to Democratic Party donors late on Thursday, Biden said that Russian President Vladimir Putin was, quote, not joking when he talks about potential use of tactical nuclear weapons or biological or chemical weapons, because his military is, you might say, significantly underperforming. Now, this part, that is garbage. The only times that Putin mentioned nuclear weapons in the last months was when he said that if you try pulling anything like that, we will respond with nuclear weapons. He didn't say we are going to hit you with nuclear weapons first. As a matter of fact, that's Zelensky saying that. You see how funny this is? That it's all about Putin, and this has nothing to do with the nukes only. It's constantly like, instead of saying Russia, the country, they'll say Putin, Putin, Putin. Putin did this, Putin did that, Putin decided this, Putin is thinking this, Putin is feeling this. It's always about this cartoon villain, right? Dr. Evil. He's the central figure of evil. And this is a really cheap propaganda tactic. You know, like they try to make it about like one guy being some nut job who's like bent on world domination, and he just wants to murder puppies or something, you know, and drink their blood. Instead of giving you the context, you have Russia and you have, you know, the United States, and they've been at each other's necks for decades. They both have nuclear weapons. They should get the fuck away from each other, and we should not, you know, cook the planet with a thermonuclear apocalypse. No, we can't talk about that. It's Putin. Putin. Christ. Really, this is what is so angering. It's like they turn the complexity of international politics into something like a comic book. You know, it's so cheap. It's so garbage. Absolute garbage. And when Biden is saying that this is, you know, he's comparing the threat now with the Cuban Missile Crisis. He is right, but not the way that you know he's portraying it. This situation is not like the Cuban Missile Crisis because of the Russians. This is like the Cuban Missile Crisis because of you and your predecessors who've been pumping those weapons in Ukraine for years. And it's nothing to do with Ukraine only. It's you know, Poland. It's the whole East Bloc, which they absorbed and they incorporated into NATO. You fucking lied to the Russians. You told them one thing and then you did the other. You fucking lied, and they're pissed. You did this shit to Ukraine. You are doing this to the world with the sanctions. The Russians didn't lie. You lied. You told them we will leave the east of Europe alone. We don't expand past Germany. NATO doubled its membership. Let me tell you something, man. If the Russians did not view that as a threat, I would think that they are either bots, they are morons, or they are high on some crazy shit. The Russians would be fucking stupid as shit to look at NATO doubling in size, coming towards their borders, and not do anything, and not say, you know, back off, or we're going to have to use these nukes. If you, you know, especially if you try using them against us, which Zelensky's coming out and saying, yeah, let's preemptively strike them. Is he stupid? Does he want to kill us all? What is wrong with this man? And the Cuban Missile Crisis, let me remind you of something. The only reason the Soviets put nuclear missiles in Cuba, well, there are two reasons. Number one, the U.S. tried to coup the government in Cuba. So obviously, you know, when you try to overthrow the government, they're going to feel threatened. That government is going to go look for help. So that's number one. The Bay of Pigs is what I'm talking about. And the other reason, which they don't tell you, is that the Americans put nukes next to Russia first. They put Jupiter missiles in Turkey. And that's why Turkey's a NATO member, because they want something that's in NATO, that's, you know, at the helm of the Middle East and in striking range of the Russians. That's why the Russians put nukes in Cuba, because you tried screwing them first. And that's why Kennedy, they make him out to look like some big hero. Like, I mean, I'm not saying he was, the worst president or something, but listen, Kennedy was embarrassed to admit that he had agreed with the Russians to withdraw the Jupiter missiles from Turkey. He had to hide that because, look at this mentality. Like, diplomacy with Russians is viewed as a bad thing. It's not okay to tell the Americans, yes, I agreed to remove the Jupiter missiles if they remove their missiles. Like, just a straight up deal, clear cut. So to avoid people finding out, they did it, I think, it was a couple months later. So within a year, they removed them from Turkey to avoid anyone like realizing what was going on. But they don't tell you that part, right? It's again, this victim mentality, like, oh, America's the victim, the West is the victim. It's always the same people who are the axis of evil, which is, again, this is a Bush term. David Frum, his speechwriter, came up with that, which, again, it goes back to this cartoon, this comic book mentality, the axis of evil. Like, it's some fucking gang of people who drink whiskey and, like, slap women or something. They try to paint the Iranians, the Russians, the Koreans, the Venezuelans, like anyone who won't give them their resources and won't play ball with Israel is the axis of evil. It's insane. They make geopolitics into a farce. Zelensky is the one who's saying we should hit them with nukes first, not to defend ourselves first, right? So he's going for that whole Bush doctrine, preemptive strikes. And then, of course, they try to sell it to you as being, it's preventative. It's our enemies hate us and they're going to attack us, so we have to imagine the worst thing possible and then attack them first. Right? This is the Israeli mentality. This is the American mentality. The Bush doctrine, the rise and kill first. It's funny because they pretend that they're defending themselves, but by doing that, you become the aggressor, and you are the aggressor. I'll play you this clip again. This is from last month, so around 21st of September.
Обеспечить безопасные условия для проведения референдумов, для того, чтобы люди могли выразить свою волю и то решение о своем будущем, которое примет большинство жителей Донецкой и Луганской народных республик, Запорожской и Херсонской областей, мы поддержим. В своей агрессивной антироссийской политике Запад перешел всякую грань. Мы постоянно слышим угрозы в адрес нашей страны, нашего народа. Некоторые безответственные политики на Западе не только говорят о планах по организации поставок в Украине дальнобойных наступательных вооружений, систем, которые позволят наносить удары по Крыму, другим регионам России. Такие террористические удары, в том числе с использованием западного оружия, уже наносятся по приграничным населенным пунктам Белгородской и Курской областей. В ход пошел и ядерный шантаж. Речь идет не только о поощряемых Западом обстрелах Запорожской атомной электростанции, что грозит атомной катастрофой, но и о высказываниях некоторых высокопоставленных представителей ведущих государств НАТО о возможности и допустимости применения против России оружия массового поражения, ядерного оружия. Тем, кто позволяет себе такие заявления в отношении России, хочу напомнить, что наша страна также располагает различными средствами поражения, а по отдельным компонентам и более современными, чем у стран НАТО. И при угрозе территориальной целостности нашей страны для защиты России и нашего народа мы, безусловно, используем все имеющиеся в нашем распоряжении средства. Это не блеф. А те, кто пытаются шантажировать нас ядерным оружием, должны знать, что роза ветров может развернуться и в их сторону.
The prevailing winds can also blow in their directions. It reminds me of when one of the first uses of chemical weapons in World War I, the wind literally blew it in the opposite direction, and yeah. But look, let's be honest with each other, guys. Take the text, the transcript of what Putin just said in this video and every other video where he mentions nuclear weapons. Does he say we should preemptively strike NATO or we should preemptively strike Ukraine with nuclear weapons? No, that's Zelensky saying that. The Russians are saying, if you use nuclear weapons, then we will respond with nuclear weapons. And by the way, we have better ones. So those are two completely different things. And you know, even if you are a Western politician and you are 100% behind Ukraine, you can't be this dumb to support what Zelensky's saying here. He says, we need preemptive strikes now so that they'll know. And then I'll let him continue. Go ahead.
Щоб вони знали, що з ними буде, якщо вони застосують, а не навпаки, чекати ядерних ударів Росію, щоб потім сказати, ах, ти так, ну ось тримай від...
See, he is talking about nukes because he says don't wait for Russia's nuclear strikes, and then the next sentence is, and then say, oh, since you did this, take that from us. What does Zelensky think that would entail? Nuclear weapons. This is the only possibility. One country uses them, the other side will use them too. It's the end of the world. So when you're threatening the Russians with this, I mean, you tell me in the comments right now if you think this excuse that Zelensky's words were misinterpreted by the interpreter, no pun intended, and that he was not talking about nuclear weapons, he was talking about sanctions. Sanctions, like as if they haven't already sanctioned Russia to death, right? That's their excuse. That's their excuse. Zelensky's spokesman later clarified on Facebook that the Ukrainian president was referring to economic sanctions, which he felt should have been imposed by the West before Russia invaded Ukraine. His spokesperson says that Zelensky meant it was, quote, necessary to take preventative measures to prevent Russia from unleashing the war, adding that Zelensky was talking about preventative economic sanctions. Do you buy this garbage? Do you think we're fucking children? When you say strikes and you're talking about nuclear weapons, you're talking about nuclear weapons. How insulting, man. This guy's trying to insult our intelligence. He's trying to start World War III and then walk it. You don't walk back World War III, you motherfucker. Either, show your balls and say you want to destroy the planet or shut up. NATO should apply preventative... What? Why do you need NATO? NATO doesn't do sanctions. The EU does sanctions. The US does sanctions. NATO does war. They do weapons. Again, you see this guy can't even lie properly, man. Get out of here. I'll say one thing, man. The Israelis, they bomb Syria all the time. They sabotage Iranian nuclear sites and kill Iranian scientists because they think it's it's preventative and they do it preemptively. The Americans invaded Iraq because they said we shouldn't wait for the Iraqis to use weapons, which they didn't even have. What does he think is going to happen? I really don't know what to say. I'm speechless. I've never seen something so stupid in my life. This is like something that a child would say, not the president of a country. Here's the White House. Here's what they had to say.
The president planned to use the word Armageddon. Why did he choose that particular reference to Revelation 16:16?
Okay, so Russia's talk of using nuclear weapons is irresponsible, and there's no way to use them without unintended consequences. It cannot.
Yeah, tell that to Zelensky. That's exactly the point. There's no way to use them without unintended consequences. Is Zelensky's stuff not irresponsible?
Happen. We won't be intimidated by Putin's rhetoric. We have not seen any reason to adjust our own nuclear posture, nor do we have indications they are preparing to use them. But Putin can de-escalate this at any time, and there is no reason to escalate.
Why were those comments made for the first time in front of a group of donors rather than at a press conference or more public type of forum?
President comments has been very consistent. He was reinforcing what we have been saying, which is how seriously we take these threats about nuclear weapons, as we have done when the Russians have made these threats throughout the conflict. So the kind of irresponsible rhetoric we have seen is no way for the leader of a nuclear-armed state to speak, and that's what the president was making very clear about.
There's no imminent threat. I mean, there's no.
No, as I said before, we have not seen any reason to adjust our own strategic nuclear posture, nor do we have indication that Russia is preparing to imminently use nuclear weapons.
I think I understand now why they don't want him in NATO. They want to use him, with NATO at the reins. But can you imagine if Ukraine was in NATO? They would activate Article 5, which I already spoke about last week when he made the application, the fast track application, and then just from a conventional standpoint, you would have Russia at war with NATO. They already are. let's not kid ourselves. But officially, and the Americans would have to commit boots on the ground and all this stuff, and that would lead to a nuclear war and so on. I don't think it's Zelensky who's the most reckless, though, because he's talking crap. But it's really the people who started this war in the first place who should have known that nuclear war is a possibility. The Russians, they have said that if their borders are threatened, the existence of their country is threatened, they will use nuclear weapons. So why would you risk that? Ukraine should have remained neutral, so that the Russians have no excuse. They don't do anything, and that NATO goes away and keeps its promise not to expand past Germany. How can you say that the Russians are escalating the situation when we see all of the former Soviet Union countries not only have they broken away from Russia, but now they've also joined the Western camp. So actually NATO has gone closer to Russia, as we've been talking about before. This is really bad. It's self-evident, it's common sense. You don't say things like that. You don't say, I want to nuke another nuclear-armed country. And just remember one last thing. The Americans are the only ones who ever used nuclear weapons. They used them twice, and they used them against Japanese civilians. And this excuse that it was to win the war is a lie, and you don't have to take my word. You can go and read the diaries from the U.S. admirals in the Navy who were actually fighting the Japanese. The guys running the show in the Pacific Theater, go read what they said. They said it was completely unnecessary, and the Japanese were on their last legs. They were going to surrender. So the real reason that they used these nukes was to scare the Russians, to as they call it, a show of force. It's like basically like a monkey showing its teeth, or an animal showing its fangs, or whatever. Like back off, or trying to scare its prey. I don't know. It's something primal like that, and it's very, very sick and evil. They literally cooked 2 entire cities just to perform a show of force in front of the Russians. So you look at that, this historical fact, and you tell me who's being reckless with nuclear weapons.